All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our FAFSA webinar presentation for Sinton and Mathis High School. My name is Nathan Schwausch, and I'm the 11th and 12th grade college advisor for Sinton High School. I'm also joined tonight by Aaron Mosley, the 11th and 12th grade college advisor for Mathis High School. Tonight, we're going to be talking about one of the most important parts of the college application process, the FAFSA. Year after year, the most common questions we get from students and families are, what is the FAFSA? How do I complete it? And what information do I need to complete it? So in this webinar tonight, we're going to discuss all of these questions and concerns so that you're all able to tackle the FAFSA as easily as possible. Now, before we begin, we publish new videos frequently on this YouTube channel. So make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can see all the great content that we publish on a regular basis. So here is a little overview of what we're going to be discussing tonight. So first, we're going to talk about what the FAFSA is and what information is needed to complete it. Then we're going to walk through the FAFSA application and discuss how to complete each section so that you're able to complete the application and hopefully schedule a meeting with your advisor if you have any questions or need help with the application. Please note that if you have any questions throughout the course of this presentation, that we will have time at the end of our presentation for Aaron and I to answer any questions or concerns that you all may have. You are also able to drop any questions that you have in the chat box on the YouTube live stream, and someone else from our advising team will do their best to answer any of your questions. So before we jump into the presentation, we did want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is a stressful process for a lot of students and families. It's not always easy to discuss family finances or talk about how expensive college can be for a student. But rest assured that we are happy to help you all out any way possible. Aaron and I have been working in college advising for over 3 years now, and we're pretty experienced with helping students and families complete the FAFSA. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email. If you'd like to schedule a time to sit down and talk about the FAFSA, you can visit our calendar links there as well, and we're happy to meet with y'all anytime. If none of the times that are listed on our calendars work for y'all, just send us an email. We're happy to work with your schedule any way we can, okay? All right, so let's jump into a little FAFSA overview. So what is the FAFSA? So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. So by completing this application, students can receive various types of financial aid to help pay for college. These types of financial aid can include grants, which are free money that students do not have to pay back. Those can come from the federal government, state government, and so on. Those can also include federal student loans. Those can be subsidized loans or unsubsidized loans. And that is also how students can apply for work-study opportunities, where a student can work on campus as a student worker and receive money to help pay for their college expenses. And also, it's in here on this slide, but also a lot of scholarships will also require students to submit their FAFSA as well. So that's another type of financial aid that students can receive by submitting their FAFSA. So the FAFSA opens on October 1st of each year. So it's been open just under a week. And students will need to complete that each year after October 1st. So it's not just a one-year thing. If a student is going to college for multiple years, they'll need to complete it again next year. And so when students complete their FAFSA, it is then sent to each school that they list on their FAFSA, and this information is used by schools to determine what types of financial aid to offer those students. All right, so let's jump into a few myths and realities that we hear a lot about the FAFSA. So one of the most common myths we hear from students is, I don't need to submit my FAFSA because my family makes way too much money. Reality is that when a student submits their FAFSA, students are able to qualify for many types of financial aid besides just financial need-based aid. Students can still receive work-study opportunities, like I said, where a student can work on campus as a student worker. You can still receive federal student loans regardless of your income, and even different grants and scholarship opportunities can still be offered because of a student completing the FAFSA. And even scholarships that are not based on financial need can, in some cases, require the FAFSA. Like I've seen a lot of local scholarship applications that require students to submit their student aid report, which is generated when they complete their FAFSA, and those are largely based on academic merit. So if you want your students to apply for scholarships, then you should definitely complete the FAFSA as soon as possible. The second myth that we see a lot of times is students say, submitting the FAFSA is basically signing up for a loan, right? I don't want to be in debt for the rest of my life from student loans, so I'm not going to submit the FAFSA. Well, the reality is that students who submit their FAFSA are not necessarily required to take out a loan. When a student receives a financial aid package after completing the FAFSA, they're offered different types of financial aid like grants, loans, scholarships, and then they are given the opportunity to either accept or decline different parts of that financial aid package. So if, for example, a student wants to accept the grants and scholarships, the free money that is, and decline the loans, you're free to decline the loans. If you want to accept the loans, you can still accept the loans. So you're not by any means obligated to take out a loan just by submitting the FAFSA. So how does the FAFSA work? So the FAFSA calculates each student's expected family contribution, or EFC, based on the student's household size and tax information. This information in the FAFSA is then shared with the schools that the student lists in the FAFSA, and the EFC is subtracted from the school's cost of attendance to determine each student's financial need. So in other words, the student's financial need will vary by each college because each college is going to have a little bit different cost of attendance. So this is why we recommend that students send their FAFSA to multiple schools, even if they have a clear-cut top choice, because financial aid packages will ultimately vary by school. Some schools may offer students bigger scholarships. Some schools may offer students smaller amounts of scholarships. So we encourage students to apply to multiple schools, send their FAFSA to multiple schools so that they can compare those different awards that they receive later on in the school year to see which is the most cost-effective option for them. So what exactly is included when we talk about cost of attendance? So the cost of attendance is the amount that a school estimates it'll cost for a student to attend that school as a full-time student for the full school year. So typically, cost of attendance can include tuition and fees, housing, and books and supplies. Note that this cost of attendance is going to vary by school. What some schools consider in cost of attendance may vary. So you need to look at what is included in one school's cost of attendance, because that number could vary greatly because they include different amounts or different items in cost of attendance. And then also note that there are some outside costs that are not going to be included in a school's cost of attendance. For example, if, say, a student from Sinton or Mathis decides to go to school in El Paso or at UT El Paso or Texas Tech, there's going to be a huge cost for that student to travel back and forth, whether it's driving back and forth or flying back and forth. Or there's also just general living expenses like, if you want to eat out, if you don't want to eat campus food all the time, if you want to sign up for Netflix and HBO Max, those obviously are not going to be included in cost of attendance. So you have to take into account those different factors as well. And then also the cost of attendance is going to vary by school because different things are going to cost different amounts at different schools. So for example, housing at UT Austin is probably going to be a lot more expensive than housing options at, say, Tarleton State University in Stephenville. So cost of attendance is going to vary greatly depending on which school the student is considering. So here is a list of information that students and parents need to complete the FAFSA. So students will need their social security number, income and tax information from 2019 if they worked, demographic information such as their address, date of birth, high school, and gender for selective service purposes, and a list of the colleges that they are considering so that the FAFSA can be sent to each of those schools. Likewise, parents will also need to provide their 2019 salary and tax information and demographic information, as well as their household size, including how many people will be in college in their household next school year. If parents have a social security number, they'll need to provide that as well. However, if a parent does not have a social security number, they are still able to complete the parent information, the parent section of the FAFSA. Now, in some cases, the student may not need to provide parental information if they qualify as an independent student. And we'll talk a little bit about what all is considered with regards to dependency status later in this presentation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how to get started on the FAFSA. So the first step was, a lot of cases, one of the more difficult parts of the FAFSA process is just creating an FSA ID username and password. So the FSA ID is a username and password combination that is used to sign the FAFSA, access the IRS data retrieval tool, and complete other financial aid requirements. So both the student and one parent will need to create an FSA ID. So to create an FSA ID, you'll just go to, I don't have the link on here, but fsaid.ed.gov, and you'll need to provide your email address, mobile phone number, social security number, and date of birth. For students, we highly recommend that you use your personal email address instead of your school email address, because you will not have access to your school email after you graduate. If you're planning on going to college and submitting a FAFSA each year and you use your school email address, you might not have access to your FSA ID, or you might have trouble retrieving access to it if you're using an account that is disabled after you graduate. So please, please, please use your personal email address. And it's also really important that you find a way to track your username and passwords, because you don't want to create your username and password now, and then when you get to working on the FAFSA and it comes time to sign and submit, you don't know your username and password and you have to go and retrieve it, and then you get locked out of your account. It just becomes a whole headache. So make sure that you write down your username and password somewhere that you can retrieve it, but where it's still secure, so that you can just pull it up and use your FSA ID to sign the FAFSA later. All right, and here are the main sections of the FAFSA application. So the first half is going to be the student section. So the student's going to fill out the demographic information, and then they're going to list all of the schools that they plan to apply to or have already applied to. For this section, students can list up to 10 schools. So I always recommend students listing every school that they've applied to or even think about applying to, just so that every school receives their FAFSA. And we'll talk about that again later in the presentation when we go over that specific section. Then students will complete the dependency status questions to determine whether or not they need to provide parental information. If they're an independent student, they'll then be directed straight to the student income information section. If the student qualifies as a dependent student, then they'll need to complete the parent demographic information, followed by the parent and student financial information. So finally, after you have provided the financial information for both the parents and the students, then all you have to do is sign the FAFSA with your FSA ID, submit it, and then you'll get your confirmation, and you are done. And that information is then sent to every college that the student listed on their FAFSA, and then the schools will ultimately send a financial aid package to that student later on in the fall semester or sometime in the spring semester, typically around, say, February or March or April. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Erin Mosley, who's going to talk about completing the FAFSA.
Hey everyone. So now that we kind of know a little bit of the basics, I'm going to walk us through actually completing a FAFSA, which is a little more than, a basic outline. All right, you can go ahead, Nathan. So this is the general kind of FAFSA layout. This is the older version. They have updated it, but during the middle of last FAFSA season, they reverted it back to the older version. So I'm not 100% sure on what it looks like this year, but this is the general layout of it. So you can see those tabs up at the top section, the student demographics, school selection, dependency, parent demographics, financial information, sign and submit, and confirmation. So those are the topics that Nathan just listed out. And so let's take a little deeper dive into student demographics. So with the demographics, it's just asking for the basic information, address, date of birth, the high school. That part is really important to make sure that you actually put it on there. And instead of just typing in Mathis High School or Sinton High School, you go through the process of actually looking it up. It's going to have a little option there for look up high school. Do that instead. It makes it so much easier on your counselors to track where you are in your FAFSA, and so that we can make sure that you do get it sent into your school when you need to. So make sure you do looking up the high school, not just typing it in. It's also going to ask for gender. Any male has to register with the selective service. So the selective service, also known as the draft, that is kind of a mandatory thing for filling out your FAFSA and receiving financial aid. It's a little outdated, but that's still what they have on there. We recommend that you go ahead and just say yes when you're filling it out if you are a male. And then that way it covers that. I always joke with students, I'm like, if it comes down to us actually needing to reinstate the draft, we have more issues than just doing financial aid. So after you pass that page, it's going to go into a few questions about your college plans, wanting to know what degree you're pursuing. Will you have completed high school at the time? Yes. And kind of finishing up on the demographic information. Now we go on to the school selection. So this is an example of what it looks like. You're going to input your, there's going to be like a little search feature where you can input the state, so Texas. If you have a school that you're looking for, you can type that in. But it's going to pull up a list, and you pick your schools off that list that you're wanting to send your FAFSA to. So with this process, like Nathan mentioned, it only allows you to enter 10 schools. 10 is a lot for some people, and for other people, they're planning on applying to like 12 or 15 schools. So put in as many as you can. If you are planning to apply to more than 10, later on you can make a correction and add more schools to your list. But for the basic start, up to 10 schools, as Nathan mentioned, any school that you're even considering, get that on here. Very important. And then it asks, the next page after that, it asks what your housing plans are. So if it's away, you can be on campus. If it's close to home with parent. Typically, you won't be putting off campus all that often, at least not for your freshman year of college. But any of those options are okay. Okay, so dependency status. These are going to be a list of questions that's used to determine whether or not you're going to include parent information. There are a lot of ways to be considered an independent student, but they are very unique circumstances. So on the side here, this little graphic shows some of the reasons why you might be considered an independent student. If you're 24 or older by December 31st, probably not. You're not going to be working towards a master's or a doctorate yet. You guys are just starting out on what's called your undergraduate degree. Probably not married or separated. You may or may not have children. It'll depend. That's one of the reasons why you could be considered an independent. You can kind of see going through here, if you were ever in the foster care system, at risk of being homeless. Those are all questions that will make you an independent student. Independent students qualify for more aid because they do not have assistance from their parents. With that said, however, if you are a student and your parents have said, we're not helping with college, unfortunately, that still makes you a dependent student. I know that that can be kind of rough for some families to kind of go through that process, like we aren't helping you, but you still need to do your FAFSA with your parents' information. That can be done kind of on a case-by-case basis of walking through and being like, okay, what do I need? But just wanted to get that out there because I know that is a struggle for some families. So dependency status has a lot going on it. And if anybody needs any help with it, please reach out to us. We are happy to kind of sort through the different circumstances and make sure that you get those questions answered correctly. So if it does qualify you as a dependent student, then you're going to need to enter your parent demographic information. So for parents, you'll need to provide last name, first initial, marital status, and if they are married, you are going to need to include the month and year of marriage. Parents' date of birth. So make sure students, when you're doing this, know your parents' date of birth because that's an awkward thing to have to text home for. You're going to need their social security number. As Nathan mentioned before, if parent is undocumented, then you can enter in all zeros for their social. Household size, so how many children are in your parents' home, as well as how many other people that your parents provide support for that live in the home. So if grandma lives with y'all and parents help support her, include that as well there. Okay. So here is what you need financial information. For parents, y'all are gonna need your 2019 taxes. So that's usually a 1040 or some variation of it. And these are from 2019, not this year, but from last year. Students, if you did file, you are also going to need your 2019 taxes. Hopefully, if you had a job, you did your taxes because more than likely y'all didn't make enough to have to pay anything and you're probably going to get some money back. So 2019 taxes, the 1040 for both parent and student if they filed. If there's some sort of weird situation, you're not sure whose taxes you're going to need, that's okay. We can help with that as well. And finally, when we're talking about the financial information, there is something on the FAFSA called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool. This syncs your tax information directly up with the IRS, so you don't have to enter it in when you're working on the FAFSA. This is kind of a safety security measure that FAFSA uses to make sure that the information that you're entering in is accurate, is correct with what you'd provided when you did your taxes in 2019. I think, Nathan, if you would go next. So this is a picture of what it looks like. So don't ignore the year on here because it looks like it's for 2016, but it's actually, you're doing your 2019. So on here, already completed, you're going to put the filing status on here. Did you file a Puerto Rican tax return? And then the question will pop up with the IRS data retrieval tool. So you're going to click on link to the IRS and it's going to give you a little notification that you're leaving FAFSA's website and take you to the IRS site. It'll pull this up, what you can see here on the right-hand side. All the information that you're going to be entering in here has to look exactly like it looks on your 1040 tax return. So down to the way drive is spelled in street address. If you live at 123 Cherokee Lane, is lane spelled out or is lane with an L in? Everything has to look exactly as it does on that. This is one of the kind of tricky little places that'll get families kind of hung up a little bit when you're doing your FAFSA. So if you do have a physical copy of those taxes, it's good to have them out so you can make sure that you are copying it down just like that. And then we send out a little prayer that it actually works, and it should link it over, and it's going to come to this page where you can click on transfer my tax information into the FAFSA form. If it gets there, you can celebrate because that means it all got transferred over. And then when you go back to the FAFSA, it'll say transferred from the IRS when we're looking at a lot of the financial aid questions. If you're unable to use the IRS linking tool, whether that be some issue with the addresses, or if you don't have a social security number, that's okay. We can enter it in manually. So don't worry too much about that. This is just one of the ways to kind of save a little bit of time. We're getting close to the end, I promise. So here you come to the FAFSA sign and submit page. So down here, students, y'all have to sign it, and parents, y'all have to sign it as well. So the way you sign your FAFSA, you are going to be using your FSA ID that you created earlier to electronically sign your FAFSA. So you'll just log in with your credentials. Once you click provide student signature, you'll input that information, and then there's a box like, yes, sign. You can do that. Parents can do that as well. If a parent doesn't have a social security number, you guys are going to have to do a signing page. Like, you actually have to print it off and sign it yourself. But if you've created your FSA ID, then it's super easy. You just sign it electronically, and then you can submit your FAFSA. And it'll take you at the very end to a confirmation page, and you can rejoice because you got that thing done. So let's go ahead and talk about some common issues. So complete the FAFSA for the 2021-2022 school year. That's huge, because that's going to be the year that students, this is the year that y'all are actually going to be attending college, 2021, 2022. If you do it for this year, that's great, but it's not going to help you next year. The tax information must be from 2019. They did this so that parents hopefully have more opportunities to do their taxes prior to the opening of FAFSA. It allowed them to open it up earlier in the year, since people, for the most part, should have already completed their 2019 taxes. Use the IRS data retrieval tool whenever possible. It'll save y'all a little bit of a headache in the future. If parents are divorced, list the parent income that the student spends over 50% of their time with. That is what the government wants you to use. All right. More issues. See, it's intense. So use your personal email when creating your FSA ID and filling out the FAFSA. Do not use a school email. That will go away after you graduate. Use a personal email. For males, make sure you fill out the selective service questions and do not put no. You need to put yes on there. Use your complete legal name if you go by a different name or you have a hyphenated last name. That's very important. List all the name that you have. And then finally, double check the information you completed in each section. That's huge. I have seen so many instances where it's a date where the two numbers just got swapped, and that holds up the completion process. So look over everything before you go on to the next page. Okay, so that's a lot of information, but we are here. We are here to help. We want to make sure that we're available for y'all. It's a fairly large process, and so we want to be here for you guys. Even after you get your FAFSA submitted, sometimes the process isn't done then, and we'll cover that later in the future. But just for right now, let's get FAFSA submitted. Y'all can do it. We're here to support y'all. These are our emails and our Calendlies, once again, for scheduling meetings. There's going to be a link dropped in chat that will include all of that information. So feel free to sign up for meetings, email us, reach out. In the month of November, we are having a couple of virtual FAFSA nights that we invite everyone to attend. So the Mathis FAFSA night is going to be on Wednesday, November 18th from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. That'll be through Zoom. We're going to have different breakout rooms. Advisors are going to be here to help. We're bringing on some extra help, so we should be able to help anyone that shows up. And then similar with the Sinton FAFSA night on Thursday, November 19th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Same thing through Zoom. We're going to support y'all. All right, so let's do some questions. Okay, so a couple of the questions that I see over in chat. Someone asked about the difference between the two loans that we mentioned way earlier in the process, the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. These are both loans that the FAFSA qualifies you for. Again, you don't have to take them out if you don't want to. Subsidized is when your student loans don't accrue interest. So they don't get more expensive, if that makes sense. They'll stay the same amount until after you graduate from college. Unsubsidized, they do gain that interest along the way. So they're not the best, but both of them are better than any personal loan that you could take out from a bank, like if you walked in. Loans get a really bad rap. And it's rough that we need loans to do college. It's definitely a big kind of weight on a lot of families' minds. So we're happy to even talk a little bit more about that sort of thing later on if you would like. You can sign up for meetings and we can discuss some of that.
Another question that we have is, if my parent used an FSA ID for an older sibling, do they have to use the same one or do they have to create a new one? So if your parent already has an FSA ID from an older sibling's FAFSA, they can still use that same FSA ID, or they should still use that same FSA ID. If they try to create a new FSA ID, they'll get stuck in a loop where it says that there's already an FSA ID with that same information with the date of birth and social security number. So then you would need to retrieve that FSA ID. So yeah.
One last question that we did have is, what if I don't have a copy of my 2019 taxes? If you don't have a copy of it, then you can easily request one on the IRS's website. You'll just be requesting a tax transcript to be sent to you. There's a way to get it downloaded, or you can have it mailed. You'll just visit the irs.gov and that should take you to it. So one last thing in chat, we are going to be dropping in a link to attendance. We definitely want to see who is here. That way we can see like, oh, okay, maybe our videos are helping people. So fill that one out if you get a chance. Really quick, a few questions on that. But I think that's all for right now. If anybody has any other questions, drop them in chat. Let us know, email, anything like that. We have a bunch of social media that you can get in contact with us on. Our YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter. We have 2 different Mathis accounts, so you can pick your high school on there. All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our webinar and watching this video. Again, if you have any questions, let us know. We're more than happy to help you out any way that we can. So thank you, everybody, and have a fantastic night.